The emergency session klaxon echoed through Station Nexus Prime with all the subtlety of a dying whale having an existential crisis. In the grand amphitheater of the Galactic Child Welfare Council, representatives from 43 species shuffled, slithered, and occasionally levitated into their designated seating areas. The air hummed with nervous energy and the faint scent of ozone from poorly maintained life support systems. Before we begin, YouTube shows me that 93% of you haven't subscribed yet. Subscribing is free, it really supports our community, and I'd love for you to be part of it. Also, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. At the center of this cosmic circus sat Chairman Blixtar, his chitinous exoskeleton gleaming under the harsh chamber lights. His compound eyes, all 612 of them, swiveled independently as he surveyed the assembled crowd with the sort of authority that came from having mandibles capable of severing titanium. The insectoid's antennae twitched with barely contained irritation as he called the session to order. "Esteemed colleagues," Blixtar began, his voice carrying the melodic clicking undertones of his species, "we gather today to address the most disturbing allegations brought before this council in the past 3 standard cycles." A ripple of anticipation swept through the chamber. In the defendants section, Ambassador Brooke sat with the kind of calm that either indicated supreme confidence or the early stages of a complete mental breakdown. Flanking her were 2 small humans, her offspring, as the files indicated. The female child, Emma, swung her legs from the oversized chair while examining her fingernails with the intense concentration of someone discovering fire. The male, Ryan, leaned against his mother's arm while sketching something in a battered notebook that had seen better decades. Vorthak, the prosecution's lead representative, rose from her crystalline perch with a sound like wind chimes being tortured by a hurricane. Her translucent form caught and refracted the chamber lights into prismatic patterns that would have been beautiful if not for the accusations she was about to level. "Honorable Chairman," Vorthak's voice resonated with harmonic frequencies that made several species' auditory organs ache. "The evidence we present today reveals a pattern of systematic child endangerment that defies all known standards of civilized child-rearing." Brooke's eyebrow twitched, barely perceptible, but in a chamber full of beings evolved to detect the slightest hint of weakness, it might as well have been a flashing neon sign. Still, she remained silent, one hand resting protectively on Ryan's shoulder, while Emma continued her fascinating study of human nail anatomy. "The human species," Vorthak continued, her form pulsing with righteous indignation, "routinely exposes their offspring to dangers that would cause any rational species to file formal complaints with their own genetic material. Observe." The central holographic display flickered to life, showing a montage of human children engaged in activities that sent shock waves of horror through the assembled delegates. Children on playground equipment that defied basic safety protocols. Offspring participating in competitive physical activities where injury was not just possible, but statistically probable. Most damning of all, human cubs in actual combat zones, apparently used as expendable reconnaissance assets. A collective gasp rippled through the chamber, or at least the species capable of gasping participated. Others expressed their shock through color changes, tentacle writhing, or the emission of distressed pheromones that triggered the air filtration system's emergency protocols. Keflon, representing the Aquatic Confederation, inflated his gill sacs to 3 times their normal size. "Barbaric," he bubbled through his translator unit. "My species maintains protective biospheres around our young for the first 16 cycles of development. These humans allow their cubs to exist in unfiltered atmospheric conditions. The evidence speaks for itself, Vorthak declared, her crystalline form now glowing with prosecutorial fervor. Human children are systematically exposed to uncontrolled gravitational forces, unsterilized social environments, physical challenges that exceed their biological limitations, and most shocking of all, they are permitted to make autonomous decisions before their neural development reaches maturity. Thaneris, his scaled hide shifting from green to an alarmed orange, hissed his agreement. My people's offspring remain within protective nesting chambers until they achieve full size. This exposure therapy appears designed to eliminate the weak through systematic attrition. Ambassador Brooke finally stirred, clearing her throat with the sort of polite sound that had historically preceded either diplomatic breakthroughs or intergalactic incidents. "Honorable Chairman, if I may?" Blixtar's antennae swiveled toward her with mechanical precision. "The defendant may speak, though I must warn you that the evidence presented appears rather comprehensive." Brooke stood, and something in her posture made the chamber fall silent. It wasn't the kind of silence that comes from politeness. It was the instinctive quiet of prey animals suddenly realizing there might be a predator in the room, even if that predator was wearing a diplomatic smile and a wrinkled pantsuit. "Honorable delegates," Brooke began, her voice carrying the sort of calm authority that came from years of explaining complex concepts to beings who thought water was an exotic luxury item. "I believe we have a fundamental misunderstanding of human protective instincts." Emma chose that moment to slip from her chair and wander over to examine the holographic display with the fearless curiosity of someone who had never learned that giant alien bureaucrats were supposed to be intimidating. Several council members recoiled as she approached, their protective instincts screaming warnings about the proximity of an unrestrained human cub. "As you can see," Brooke continued, "without missing a beat, human children are naturally inquisitive. We don't consider this a flaw to be corrected. We consider it a feature to be cultivated." Grixmore, speaking through their collective consciousness translator, buzzed with confusion. "Feature? Curiosity leads to injury. Injury leads to weakness. Weakness leads to elimination from the genetic pool. This is basic evolutionary mathematics." "Is it, though?" Brooke asked, and something in her tone made Emma glance back at her mother before returning to her examination of the holographic evidence. The child was now pointing at images of human children engaged in what the prosecution had labeled hazardous recreational activities, but were actually just kids playing soccer. "Your Honor," Vorthak interjected, her form pulsing with renewed urgency, "we cannot allow sentiment to cloud our judgment. The human delegation has brought actual cubs into this chamber, cubs that are currently exhibiting the exact behavioral patterns we seek to prevent." And indeed, Emma had now enlisted Ryan in her investigation of the holographic display. The 8-year-old had abandoned his sketching to point out various details in the images to his sister. Their conversation a mixture of whispered observations and barely contained giggles. "Precisely my point," Brooke said, and her smile had the sort of edge that made experienced diplomats check their insurance policies. "You see dangerous behavior. I see learning in progress." Chairman Blixtar's mandibles clicked in what might have been thoughtfulness, or possibly just the alien equivalent of grinding one's teeth. "Ambassador Brooke, the allegations before this council are serious. The evidence suggests that human child-rearing practices constitute systematic negligence at best, and at worst." "At worst, what?" Brooke challenged. And now her diplomatic mask was slipping just enough to reveal something that made several council members suddenly remember urgent business elsewhere. At worst, we're raising children who are capable of independent thought, physical resilience, and adaptive problem-solving. The horror. The sarcasm in her voice could have been bottled and sold as a controlled substance on 17 different worlds. This council has jurisdiction over child welfare across all member species, Vorthak declared, her crystalline form now blazing with indignation. If human cubs are being systematically endangered through negligent exposure to hazardous conditions, we have not only the right, but the obligation to intervene. A hush fell over the chamber as the implications sank in. Intervention, in Galactic Child Welfare Council terms, meant mandatory removal of offspring to approved care facilities until parents could demonstrate adherence to established safety protocols. Given that established safety protocols included things like no exposure to unfiltered sunlight and no physical activity without comprehensive protective equipment, compliance would be challenging. Emma, apparently oblivious to the political firestorm brewing around her, had discovered that the holographic display responded to touch. She was now manipulating images with the sort of technological intuition that came naturally to humans, but seemed to astound the alien observers. Several delegates were taking notes, their writing implements scratching, clicking, or glowing across various recording media. "The Council demands proof," Blixtar announced, his voice carrying the weight of bureaucratic finality. "Proof that human child-rearing practices do not constitute systematic endangerment. You have 48 standard hours to demonstrate that your offspring are adequately protected under current human protocols." "And if we refuse?" Brooke asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "Refusal constitutes admission of negligence," Vorthak replied with crystalline certainty. Immediate intervention protocols would be implemented across all human settlements within Galactic Council jurisdiction. The threat hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Around the chamber, delegates shifted uncomfortably as they contemplated the logistics of forcibly separating human cubs from their parents, based on what was, essentially, a philosophical disagreement about risk management. Brooke looked down at her children, Emma now showing Ryan how to manipulate the holographic controls, while he explained something about image resolution that was probably technically accurate, but definitely above his grade level. Then she looked back at the assembled council with the sort of smile that had historically preceded either diplomatic breakthroughs or spectacular diplomatic failures. "Fine," she said, and something in that single word made the environmental controls hum a little louder. "But we do this properly. Full observation protocols, complete behavioral analysis. And when this is over, when you've seen exactly how humans raise their young, I want a formal apology from every species that voted for these proceedings." The confidence in her voice was either inspiring or terrifying, depending on one's perspective on human psychological stability. "Agreed," Blixtar clicked, his compound eyes focusing on the small family with the intensity of a predator sizing up either prey or competition. Observation Chamber 12 has been prepared with full monitoring equipment. You and your offspring will remain under continuous surveillance while engaged in normal human child-rearing activities. "Perfect," Brooke replied, gathering her children with the sort of casual efficiency that somehow made the simple act of family organization look like a military maneuver. "Emma, Ryan, we're going to show these nice aliens how humans take care of their cubs." Emma looked up from the holographic display with bright eyes. "Are we going to do fun stuff?" "The funnest stuff," Brooke confirmed, and several council members suddenly wondered if they had made a terrible mistake. As the small human family was escorted toward the observation chambers, the delegates began their own hurried conferences. 43 species worth of child-rearing experts were about to get a crash course in human family dynamics, and not one of them had any idea what they were actually about to witness. The observation chamber doors sealed with a definitive hiss, and the monitoring equipment hummed to life. In 48 hours, the Galactic Child Welfare Council would either validate their concerns about human child-rearing practices, or they would learn something that would fundamentally challenge every assumption they had about the nature of protection, growth, and the delicate art of raising the next generation. Chairman Blixtar settled into his observation throne, all 612 eyes focused on the monitors. Whatever happened next, it was going to be educational. Whether that education would be pleasant was another question entirely. Observation Chamber 12 looked like someone had tried to design a luxury hotel room using only the aesthetic sensibilities of a medical laboratory and the color palette of disappointment. The walls were a soothing shade of beige that managed to be both sterile and somehow vaguely threatening, while the furniture appeared to have been designed by committee, a committee comprised entirely of beings who had never actually sat on anything in their lives. Brooke surveyed their temporary home with the practiced eye of someone who had slept in diplomatic quarters across 6 different star systems. "Well," she announced to her children, "it's not the Marriott, but at least the surveillance equipment looks expensive." Emma bounced on the couch-like structure, testing its responsiveness with the sort of scientific rigor that would have impressed a materials engineer. "It's bouncy," she declared, then proceeded to demonstrate this discovery with the enthusiasm of someone who had just invented gravity. Ryan, meanwhile, had located what appeared to be an entertainment console and was examining it with the focused intensity of an archaeologist decoding ancient hieroglyphs. "Mom, I think this is supposed to be their version of a tablet, but the interface is really weird. It's like they designed it for beings with tentacles." "Probably because they did," Brooke replied, settling into what might charitably be called a chair. In the Galactic Council's defense, it was comfortable for approximately 3 different body types, none of which happened to be human. "Remember, kids, we're being watched by representatives from 43 different species. Try not to horrify them too badly in the first hour." What she didn't mention, though she was acutely aware of it, was the subtle hum of monitoring equipment embedded in every surface. Bio-neural feeds, atmospheric analyzers, stress indicators, and probably at least 6 different types of cameras were documenting their every move somewhere in the observation deck. Dozens of alien beings were watching their family with the sort of fascination usually reserved for studying dangerous wildlife. In the observation deck, that fascination was indeed reaching fever pitch. Cephalon had inflated his gill sacs to maximum capacity and was taking notes with 3 different appendages simultaneously. His aquatic species young spent the first 16 cycles of their lives in carefully maintained biospheres, protected from every possible environmental hazard. Watching human cubs move freely through uncontrolled space was like watching someone juggle live explosives while blindfolded. "Note the complete absence of protective barriers," he bubbled into his recording device. "The adult human appears unconcerned that her offspring are testing furniture durability without safety harnesses." Grixmore, their collective consciousness distributed across 18 individual forms, buzzed with hive-minded confusion. The small female is engaging in repetitive impact testing of the seating apparatus. This behavior serves no apparent survival function. Query: is this a form of self-harm ritual? "No," Thanerus hissed, his scales shifting to an agitated orange. "Observe the adult's response. She exhibits no distress markers. Either human protective instincts are fundamentally broken, or—" He paused, his reptilian brain struggling with an uncomfortable possibility. "Or they have a completely different understanding of what constitutes danger. Meanwhile, in the chamber, Emma had discovered that the couch could be reconfigured into different shapes. What the aliens had intended as a basic seating solution, she was systematically transforming into what appeared to be a fort, a spaceship, and possibly a launching platform for stuffed animals. "Emma," Ryan called from the entertainment console, "come look at this." I figured out how to make it work for human hands. The 6-year-old abandoned her furniture engineering project and bounced over to her brother, who had somehow managed to jury-rig the alien interface into something resembling functionality. Together, they began exploring the system's capabilities with the sort of collaborative problem-solving that made their observers frantically scribble notes about human collective intelligence protocols. Brooke watched her children with the sort of casual attention that had apparently scandalized every child-rearing expert in the known galaxy. She wasn't hovering, wasn't constantly redirecting their activities, and wasn't maintaining physical contact to ensure their immediate safety. Instead, she was simply available, present, ready to intervene if needed, but allowing them the freedom to explore and learn. "Barbaric," Yulbeth whispered from the observation deck, her feathers ruffling with distress. Her avian species maintained constant physical contact with their young until they achieved full flight capability. The adult human is permitting unsupervised exploration of unknown technology. The cubs could accidentally activate harmful functions. As if summoned by her concern, Emma managed to accidentally trigger what appeared to be the chamber's atmospheric mood lighting. The sterile beige suddenly transformed into a cascade of colors that would have been beautiful if they hadn't also triggered the emergency biochemical analysis protocols. Alarms began wailing. Warning lights flashed. The chamber's safety systems, designed by the most paranoid engineers in the galaxy, immediately assumed that the color change indicated some sort of toxic atmospheric contamination and began implementing emergency containment procedures. The alien observers held their breath, or whatever their species did instead of breathing, waiting for the human adult to panic. Surely now they would see the true inadequacy of human protective instincts. Surely now the adult would demonstrate the same hysterical overprotectiveness that characterized every other civilized species. Brooke looked up from her examination of the chamber's frankly insulting excuse for reading material, assessed the flashing lights and wailing sirens with the sort of calm that usually preceded either enlightenment or explosions, and said, "Emma, honey, what did you touch?" "The pretty button," Emma replied cheerfully, apparently unperturbed by the fact that she had just convinced an alien safety system that she was a walking chemical weapon. "Can you find the pretty button again, and maybe untouch it?" Brooke suggested, with the sort of patience that implied this was not her first experience with her daughter's talent for accidental chaos. "Oh, sure." Emma poked at the interface with the confident competence of someone who had never met a piece of technology she couldn't figure out. The lights returned to their original boring beige, and the alarms subsided into sullen silence. In the observation deck, the silence was deafening. Vorthak's crystalline form had dimmed to barely visible, while Kephalon appeared to be having some sort of aquatic nervous breakdown. Did she just solve that like it was routine?" Cortex asked, his silicon-based processing centers struggling to compute what they had just witnessed. The adult exhibited no panic response, Thainris observed, his scales slowly returning to their normal green. The cubs showed no fear. They treated a potential environmental hazard as if it were a learning opportunity, Grixmore finished, their collective voice carrying a note of something that might have been admiration or possibly existential terror. Back in the chamber, life continued with the sort of mundane normalcy that was apparently revolutionary in the context of galactic child-rearing. Emma had returned to her furniture architecture project, while Ryan was now attempting to explain human user interface design to an alien computer system that seemed both fascinated and deeply confused by his suggestions. "Mom," Ryan called, "I think I can make this thing play games, but they're all designed for beings with, like, 6 eyes and no concept of gravity. Want me to see if I can find something normal?" "As long as something normal doesn't involve accidentally declaring war on anyone," Brooke replied, and several observers frantically checked whether human children were capable of accessing military systems through entertainment consoles. "I'll stick to educational stuff," Ryan promised, and promptly found what appeared to be an alien equivalent of mathematics tutorials. Within minutes, he and Emma were collaboratively solving problems that had been designed for species with fundamentally different cognitive architectures, adapting the alien logic to human understanding with the sort of intellectual flexibility that made their observers question everything they thought they knew about cognitive development. "Note," Keflon bubbled weakly into his recording device. "Human cubs demonstrate independent problem-solving capabilities that exceed baseline expectations for their developmental stage. Query: are all human offspring this competent?" The question hung in the observation deck like a toxic cloud of uncomfortable implications. If human children were naturally this capable, this resilient, this adaptable, then what did that say about every other species' approach to child-rearing? What did it say about the fundamental assumptions underlying the Galactic Child Welfare Council's entire existence? As the first hour of observation drew to a close, something unprecedented was happening in the council chambers. For the first time in the organization's history, the observers were beginning to question not whether the subjects were being properly protected, but whether the observers themselves understood what protection actually meant. Brooke, blissfully unaware that she was precipitating a crisis of faith among galactic child welfare experts, was teaching Emma how to braid friendship bracelets while Ryan attempted to reverse engineer alien recreational mathematics. It was, by human standards, a perfectly ordinary afternoon. By alien standards, it was nothing short of revolutionary. The monitoring equipment hummed quietly, documenting every moment of this radical experiment in human child-rearing, while 43 species worth of observers tried to process the uncomfortable possibility that everything they thought they knew about raising young might be catastrophically wrong. Outside the observation chamber, Chairman Blixitar's compound eyes focused on the monitors with the intensity of someone watching his entire world-view crumble in real time. 46 hours and 58 minutes remaining until judgment. Somehow, that no longer seemed like nearly enough time. Hour 18 of the observation period arrived with all the subtlety of a diplomatic incident, which, coincidentally, was exactly what Chairman Blixitar was beginning to suspect he had on his hands. The human family had been under continuous surveillance for nearly a full cycle, and the data streaming back to the observation deck was causing what could only be described as a collective nervous breakdown among galactic child welfare experts. The problem wasn't that the humans were failing to meet safety standards. The problem was that they were operating according to safety standards that apparently didn't exist in any known xenobiological database. "Initiate Phase 2 testing protocols," Blixitar announced, his mandibles clicking with the sort of determination that historically preceded either brilliant discoveries or spectacular disasters. Around the observation deck, representatives from 43 species prepared to witness what they hoped would finally provide evidence of human child-rearing inadequacy. Instead, they were about to get an education in human crisis management that would haunt their sleep cycles for months. The first test was simple: simulated station breach. Warning klaxons began wailing throughout Observation Chamber 12, while emergency lights bathed everything in the sort of red glow that universally meant something has gone catastrophically wrong. Atmospheric pressure sensors triggered false readings suggesting hull compromise, while the chamber's environmental systems began broadcasting automated evacuation protocols in 6 different languages, none of which happened to be human. In the observation deck, the aliens leaned forward, or performed whatever anatomical equivalent their species used for focused attention. This was it. This was the moment when human protective instincts would finally reveal their fundamental inadequacy. Surely now, the adult would panic, abandon logical thinking, and demonstrate the same hysterical overprotectiveness that characterized every civilized species. Brooke looked up from helping Emma construct what appeared to be an architectural marvel built entirely from alien furniture cushions. The klaxons were loud enough to wake the dead. The lights were flashing with epileptic intensity, and the automated voice was explaining in increasingly urgent tones that immediate evacuation was required for survival. "Huh," Brooke said, with the sort of calm that implied she had encountered more convincing emergencies at suburban PTA meetings. "Kids, looks like we're having a drill." Emma popped her head up from inside her cushion fortress. "Is it a real emergency or a fake emergency?" "What do you think?" Brooke asked. And the simple question sent shockwaves through the observation deck, because no parent in the known galaxy asked their offspring to assess danger levels during a crisis. Emma considered this with 6-year-old logic that was apparently more sophisticated than most species' emergency protocols. Well, if it was real, the air would smell different. And you'd be moving differently. And Ryan would have stopped reading. She paused, glancing at her brother, who was indeed still absorbed in what appeared to be an alien mathematics textbook. So it's probably fake. "Good reasoning," Brooke confirmed, and several observers frantically updated their notes about human cognitive development timelines. Ryan looked up from his book with the mild irritation of someone whose reading time had been interrupted by unnecessary dramatics. Also, if it was real, the evacuation instructions would be in human languages. The fact that they're only broadcasting in Galactic Standard, Aquatic Secondary, and what sounds like crystalline emergency protocols suggests this is designed to test our response rather than actually save our lives. The observation deck fell silent, except for the sound of Keflon's gill sacks deflating in shock. An 8-year-old human had just demonstrated crisis analysis capabilities that exceeded most adult alien cognitive standards. "Excellent point," Brooke agreed. "So what should we do during a fake emergency drill?" "Practice real emergency procedures," Emma suggested. "Outstanding idea." "Ryan, would you mind handling communications while Emma and I check our exit routes?" And then, while alien observers watched in stunned fascination, the human family began implementing what could only be described as the most terrifyingly efficient emergency response protocol any of them had ever witnessed. But it wasn't terrifying because it was chaotic or panicked. It was terrifying because it was calm, coordinated, and clearly the result of extensive training. Ryan moved to the chamber's communication panel and began a systematic assessment of available channels, testing connectivity and signal strength with the methodical competence of someone who had done this before. Emma began a cheerful inventory of potential exit routes, checking door mechanisms and emergency systems with the thorough attention to detail of a professional safety inspector. Brooke coordinated their activities while simultaneously gathering essential supplies and preparing for potential evacuation. They moved like a unit. Not like a parent frantically trying to protect helpless children, but like a team of specialists who happen to be related. Note the coordination patterns. Vorthak whispered, her crystalline form pulsing with colors that indicated severe cognitive dissonance. The offspring are not burden objects to be protected. They are active participants in survival protocols. Impossible, Thunderous hissed, his scales cycling through colors that indicated deep philosophical confusion. Young cannot be responsible for their own safety. Young require constant supervision and protection until they achieve full developmental maturity. Tell that to the human cubs, Grixmore buzzed, their collective consciousness struggling to process what they were witnessing. The small female just identified 3 separate evacuation routes and assessed the structural integrity of the emergency exit. Mechanisms. The male has established communication protocols with station emergency services and verified that this is indeed a drill. In the chamber, Emma had discovered that the emergency exit panels opened into maintenance corridors that connected to the station's primary evacuation routes. "Mom!" she called cheerfully. If this was real, we could get to the emergency pods in about 2 minutes using the service tunnels. But the main corridors would take at least 5 minutes because of bottleneck points near the central hub. "How did you figure that out, sweetheart?" Brooke asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "I've been making maps," Emma replied, producing a notebook filled with surprisingly accurate sketches of the station's layout. "I like to know where things are." Several alien observers experienced what their species' equivalent of cardiac events, because a 6-year-old human had just demonstrated spatial reasoning and strategic planning capabilities that exceeded their own adult standards. Phase 2 testing complete, Blixtar announced, though his voice carried the sort of uncertainty that suggested he was beginning to question the fundamental nature of reality. Initiate Phase 3 protocols. Phase 3 was designed to test parental response to offspring injury. The chamber's environmental systems began generating localized atmospheric disturbances, essentially artificial weather designed to create slippery conditions and minor obstacles. The theory was that human cubs, being inadequately supervised, would inevitably injure themselves, at which point the adult's response would reveal the true nature of human protective instincts. The atmospheric disturbance lasted approximately 38 seconds before Emma slipped on the newly slick floor and scraped her knee on the edge of the furniture fort she had been constructing. The alien observers held their collective breath. This was it. This was the moment when human child-rearing inadequacy would be revealed. The adult would either panic and demonstrate hysterical overprotectiveness, or, worse, would ignore the injury entirely, proving that humans simply didn't care about their offspring's welfare. Emma looked down at her scraped knee, which was bleeding in the sort of minor but dramatic way that childhood injuries always managed. She considered this development with the scientific curiosity of someone encountering an interesting biological phenomenon. "Ouch!" she announced, with the sort of clinical detachment that made several observers wonder if human children were genetically incapable of appropriate pain responses. Brooke materialized beside her daughter with the sort of fluid movement that suggested she had been monitoring the situation without appearing to hover. She knelt down to Emma's level and examined the injury with practiced efficiency. "Looks like we've got a standard scrape, kiddo. What's our protocol?" "Clean it. Check for debris. Apply antiseptic. Bandage, if necessary," Emma recited, then added, "and document the cause so we can avoid similar incidents in the future." "Perfect. Ryan, would you mind getting the first aid supplies?" Ryan appeared with a medical kit that was both more comprehensive and better organized than most alien emergency medical systems. Together, the family proceeded to treat Emma's injury with the sort of calm professionalism that made it clear this was routine procedure rather than crisis management. But what truly horrified the alien observers was Emma's response to the treatment. She didn't cry. She didn't demand emotional comfort. She didn't exhibit any of the behavioral patterns associated with trauma or distress. Instead, she watched the cleaning and bandaging process with fascination, asked intelligent questions about wound care, and offered suggestions for improving their first aid protocols. "There," Brooke said, applying the final piece of medical tape. "How does that feel?" Emma tested the bandage's flexibility and assessed its impact on her mobility. "Good. Thanks, Mom. Can I get back to building my fort now?" "Of course. Just remember what caused the slip so you can avoid it next time." The atmospheric moisture created a low-friction surface that wasn't immediately visible, Emma replied, already planning modifications to her construction project that would account for environmental variables. "I'll adjust my movement patterns accordingly." And with that, she bounced back to her fort construction with the sort of resilient enthusiasm that made 43 different species question everything they thought they knew about childhood trauma response. In the observation deck, the silence was profound enough to have its own gravitational field. The offspring treated injury as a learning experience, Keflon bubbled weakly. The adult provided medical care without emotional hysteria, Yulbeth chirped, her feathers ruffled with confusion. The entire family processed the incident as routine maintenance rather than crisis intervention, Cordix observed, his silicon-based processing centers overheating from cognitive strain. Chairman Blixtar's compound eyes focused on the monitors with the intensity of someone watching his entire understanding of child development collapse in real time. Phase 4 testing was scheduled to begin in 2 hours. Somehow, he was beginning to suspect that Phase 4 was going to be even more educational than anyone had anticipated. Phase 4 arrived with the dramatic timing of a cosmic revelation, which was fitting because that's exactly what it was about to become. Chairman Blixitar's mandibles clicked with nervous energy as he authorized the final test sequence, a complete environmental shutdown designed to simulate catastrophic system failure. If human protective instincts were going to reveal their fundamental inadequacy, this would be the moment. "Initiate total environmental shutdown," he commanded, and the observation deck hummed with anticipation. This was the test that would finally prove what everyone already knew, that human child-rearing practices were dangerously inadequate compared to civilized galactic standards. The chamber lights died instantly, plunging the human family into absolute darkness. Life support systems powered down with mechanical finality. Emergency backup systems remained offline. The only illumination came from the alien observers' monitoring equipment, which had switched to infrared and biothermal imaging to document the inevitable human panic response. What they saw instead rewrote their understanding of family dynamics. In the darkness, there was no crying, no panicked calls for help, no desperate scrambling or confused shouting. Instead, there was the soft sound of movement, purposeful, coordinated, and utterly calm. "Emma, Ryan, sound off." Brooke's voice carried through the darkness with quiet authority. "Emma here. I'm by the furniture fort. No injuries, good mobility." "Ryan here. I'm near the communication console. Systems appear to be completely offline." "Copy that. Standard blackout protocols. Ryan, can you access the emergency communication array?" "Already on it. Backup power systems are offline, but I can probably jury-rig something using the entertainment console's power cell if you need me to." "Hold that thought. Emma, what's your assessment of our situation?" In the observation deck, alien beings leaned forward in stunned fascination as a 6-year-old human began delivering a tactical assessment that would have impressed military strategists. "We've got good air circulation, so life support failure isn't immediate. Temperature is stable. No unusual sounds or smells indicating actual emergency. Probable duration. Emma paused, apparently thinking. Based on standard testing protocols, probably 10 to 20 minutes maximum. They want to see how we respond, not actually hurt us. Excellent analysis. Ryan, add anything? Electromagnetic signature suggests monitoring equipment is still active on external power sources. We're being watched. Also, if this was a real emergency, station-wide klaxons would be active, and we'd hear evacuation procedures in the corridors. Vorthek's crystalline form had dimmed to barely visible as she processed what she was witnessing. The offspring are conducting situational analysis superior to most adult cognitive capabilities. This is impossible. But the impossible was just getting started. Through the biothermal imaging, the aliens watched as the human family moved through the darkness with fluid coordination. They weren't huddling together in terrified confusion. They weren't waiting for rescue. Instead, they were implementing what could only be described as advanced emergency response protocols. Emma moved to secure their supply cache, the snacks and water they had organized earlier, while simultaneously establishing a safe, gathering point near the center of the chamber. Ryan began a systematic assessment of available resources, testing equipment functionality, and identifying potential emergency tools. Brooke coordinated their activities while maintaining perimeter awareness and monitoring their emotional states. They moved like a military unit that happened to be related. Note the coordination patterns, Grixmore whispered, their collective consciousness struggling to process the data. No verbal communication required. Each family member anticipates the other's actions and responds accordingly. How is this possible? Keflon bubbled weakly. Young require constant guidance and supervision. They cannot possibly demonstrate independent tactical thinking. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. As the observation continued, the aliens began to notice something that defied every known principle of child protection. The human offspring weren't just being protected by their parent. They were actively protecting her. Emma had positioned herself to monitor the chamber's secondary exit, ensuring their escape route remained clear. Ryan had placed himself near the communication array, ready to establish emergency contact if needed. Both children maintained awareness of their mother's position and status, while simultaneously monitoring their environment for threats. It wasn't just mutual protection. It was tactical coordination. "They've formed a defensive triangle," Thainris hissed, his scales cycling through colors that indicated severe cognitive disturbance. "The offspring aren't liability objects to be protected. They're active participants in family security protocols." The realization hit the observation deck like a shockwave. For countless generations, every civilized species had operated under the fundamental assumption that young were helpless burdens requiring constant protection until they achieved biological maturity. The idea that offspring could be active partners in survival was so alien that most languages didn't even have words for it. "Mom," Emma's voice carried through the darkness with quiet confidence. "I think they're going to restart the lights soon. Mr. Blixtar's stress indicators have been increasing for the past few minutes." "How can you possibly know that?" Brooke asked, though her tone suggested pride rather than confusion. "The monitoring equipment makes different sounds when they're transmitting different types of data. Stress analysis creates a higher frequency harmonic than standard observation protocols." Even Ryan was impressed. "That's actually brilliant, Em. I didn't notice the audio patterns." "I pay attention to different stuff than you do," Emma replied with the matter-of-fact wisdom of someone who had learned that survival often depended on noticing details others missed. In the observation deck, Chairman Blixtar's compound eyes focused on his own stress indicators, which were indeed spiking toward dangerous levels. A 6-year-old human had just demonstrated auditory analysis capabilities that exceeded most species' technological enhancement systems. "Restore environmental systems," he commanded, and the chamber lights flickered back to life. What the cameras revealed sent the final shockwave through the assembled observers. The human family hadn't spent the darkness cowering in fear or waiting for rescue. They had used the time to organize their space for maximum efficiency, prepare for potential evacuation, and establish communication protocols for extended emergency scenarios. They looked like they had been planning their next vacation rather than surviving a life-threatening crisis. "Test sequence complete," Blixtar announced, though his voice carried the hollow tone of someone whose worldview had just been systematically demolished. The voting commenced immediately, because the observers needed to process what they had witnessed before their sanity finished its complete departure. 43 species worth of child welfare experts cast their votes on the fundamental question: did human child-rearing practices constitute systematic endangerment? The vote was unanimous. Absolutely not. But the real shock came with the follow-up motions. 17 different species formally requested human consultation on child development protocols. 23 species submitted applications for cultural exchange programs focused on human-family dynamics. 6 species requested emergency intervention to reform their own child protection systems based on human models. "Motion carries," Blixtar announced, with the sort of ceremonial gravity reserved for momentous occasions. "All charges against human child-rearing practices are hereby dismissed with commendation. Furthermore, this council formally recognizes human family dynamics as representing advanced collaborative survival protocols worthy of study and emulation." Brooke accepted the formal apology with the gracious smile of someone who had never doubted the outcome. "Thank you, Honorable Chairman. Though I believe my children deserve most of the credit for demonstrating that human cubs are considerably more capable than your initial assessment suggested." Emma looked up from reassembling her furniture fort with engineering precision that suggested a promising career in architecture. "Does this mean we can go home now?" "Soon, sweetheart. First, these nice beings want to learn more about how human families work." Ryan glanced up from his alien mathematics textbook, which he had apparently mastered during the blackout period. "Are we going to be teachers now?" "Looks like it," Brooke confirmed, and the observation deck buzzed with the sort of excitement usually reserved for major scientific breakthroughs. As their transport prepared for departure, Chairman Blixtar reflected on the most educational 48 hours of his career. The Galactic Child Welfare Council had convened to judge human child-rearing practices, and had instead discovered that they had been asking the wrong questions entirely. The real question wasn't whether human children were adequately protected. The real question was whether every other species in the galaxy had been catastrophically overprotecting their young for countless generations, creating helpless dependents instead of capable partners. Emma and Ryan slept against their mother during the journey home, still unconsciously maintaining the protective positions they had demonstrated throughout their observation period. Even in rest, they remained guardians of their family unit. The council had demanded proof that human cubs were safe. Instead, they had learned that human cubs were warriors, strategists, and protectors in their own right. The difference, it turned out, was everything.